"Repeat your identification," the captain said into the radio. "Shadowhawk," she replied calmly from seat 8D. The cockpit froze. That call sign belonged to a pilot declared dead 5 years ago. But now Russian jets were closing in, 312 passengers were screaming, and the quiet woman they just allowed inside was their only hope. The legend they thought was buried was about to fly again, whether the world was ready or not. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. Dr. Elena Price had perfected the art of being invisible. She sat in seat 8D of United Airlines Flight 1847, Los Angeles to London, wearing a navy blazer over a simple white blouse, reading glasses perched on her nose, laptop open to a research paper on advanced aerodynamics. Around her, the Boeing 787 Dreamliner hummed with the familiar chaos of boarding, passengers wrestling luggage into overhead bins, flight attendants checking seatbelts, children crying, businessmen already typing emails before the plane even left the gate. Elena was 41 years old. She had shoulder-length brown hair, carefully styled to look professional but unremarkable. Her makeup was subtle. Her clothes were expensive enough to suggest success but not so expensive that anyone would remember them. She wore a wedding ring on her left hand even though she'd never been married. It discouraged conversation. The businessman in 8C had tried talking to her during boarding. Mid-50s, expensive suit, the kind of man who thought everyone wanted to hear about his work. "Long flight ahead," he'd said with a smile that showed too many teeth. "Heading to London for business?" Elena had looked up from her laptop, returned a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Research conference." Then she'd gone back to her screen. The conversation died. The businessman turned to his own laptop, discouraged. Perfect. The teenager in 8E had earbuds jammed in her ears, head bobbing to music only she could hear, lost in whatever made teenagers feel alive these days. She hadn't even glanced at Elena. Also perfect. When the flight attendant came through during the initial drink service, Elena ordered tea. The attendant, a woman in her 30s with tired eyes and a practiced smile, handed over the cup and moved on without a second glance. She would never remember the quiet professor in 8D. Exactly as Elena wanted it. For 5 years, she had practiced this particular magic trick. Becoming forgettable. Blending into crowds. Moving through the world like a ghost, leaving no impression, creating no memories. It was harder than people thought. Being truly invisible required constant attention to detail. The right clothes, the right expressions, the right amount of engagement. Too much and people remembered you. Too little and your silence became memorable. Elena had it down to a science. Nobody looking at the quiet professor could possibly imagine that 15 years ago, she had been Captain Maya Shadowhawk Reeves, the deadliest stealth pilot the United States Air Force had ever produced. Nobody would believe this unremarkable woman had flown 143 classified missions in aircraft the general public didn't know existed. Nobody could connect this forgettable passenger to the legend whispered in Pentagon briefings, the pilot who could penetrate any airspace, who flew missions that changed the course of wars without anyone knowing those wars were being fought, who vanished into the night sky and returned with intelligence that powerful people would kill to possess. And absolutely nobody knew that 5 years ago, the United States Air Force had declared Captain Maya Reeves killed in action during a classified mission over Russian territory. They'd held a memorial service at Andrews Air Force Base. 37 people attended, most of them couldn't speak about what Maya had actually done because everything was classified. Her commanding officer had given a speech that talked about duty and sacrifice without mentioning a single mission. Her name was carved on a black granite monument honoring pilots lost in operations so secret that their families were never told the truth. The Air Force had sealed Maya's records under the highest security classification the government possessed. Her service record, her mission logs, her flight training evaluations, all of it locked away behind walls of secrecy that would last decades. Captain Maya Reeves died so Dr. Elena Price could live. It hadn't been Maya's choice. Not entirely. Her final mission had gone catastrophically wrong in ways that still gave her nightmares. She'd been flying deep penetration reconnaissance over a Russian military facility near Kazan, gathering signals intelligence on advanced weapons systems. The mission had been perfect, in and out without detection, the kind of operation she'd flown 100 times before. But when she'd analyzed the data after landing, she'd found something she wasn't supposed to find. Evidence of a massive intelligence breach. Someone high up in the American military was selling classified information to the Russians. Not small secrets, major strategic intelligence. Troop movements, weapons capabilities, operational plans. Everything the Russians would need to counter American military operations worldwide. Maya had reported it immediately. Within 48 hours, her life had become a nightmare. The leak went higher than anyone expected. People with serious power wanted her silenced. Foreign intelligence agencies wanted her captured and interrogated about the missions she'd flown over their territory. The Air Force couldn't protect her, the threats were coming from inside the system. They'd given her two options: disappear completely under witness protection, or become a very real casualty. She'd chosen to vanish. The Air Force had faked her death. Created a cover story about a training accident. Held the memorial service. And then witness protection had given her a new identity, a new face, and very clear instructions: never use your real name, never contact anyone from your old life, never fly a plane again, and absolutely never mention who you used to be. For 5 years, it had worked perfectly. Elena had earned a doctorate in aerospace engineering under her new identity. The background checks had all been handled by federal agents who made sure no one looked too closely. She'd become a professor at a mid-sized university in Oregon, teaching undergraduate courses on flight dynamics and aircraft design. She lived in a modest apartment, drove a 10-year-old Honda, dated occasionally but never seriously enough that anyone would investigate her past. She'd changed everything about herself. Lost 23 pounds. Grew her hair longer. Started wearing glasses she didn't actually need. Changed her posture, rounded her shoulders, softened her stride, eliminated the military bearing that had been drilled into her over 15 years of service. She'd worked with speech coaches to soften her voice, eliminate the crisp military diction, add hesitation and uncertainty to her speech patterns. She'd become someone entirely different. And for 5 years, she'd flown commercially dozens of times without incident. She'd passed through security checkpoints with her new passport and driver's license. She'd sat on planes, reading or working, just another professional traveler in the endless stream of people moving through airports. Nobody had ever recognized her. Nobody had ever suspected. But today, 8 hours into a transatlantic flight at 41,000 feet, crossing an ocean in a pressurized tube with 312 other people, that carefully constructed anonymity was about to explode in the worst possible way. Elena had no idea yet. She was reading her paper, sipping her tea, completely unaware that in the cockpit, the pilots had just received a transmission that would change everything. Captain David Walsh was 61 years old, with 29 years of flying experience and a reputation for being unshakable. He had silver hair that had started going gray when he was 40, calm hazel eyes, and the kind of steady voice that made nervous passengers relax. In 3 decades of commercial flying, he'd landed planes with failed engines, flown through thunderstorms that terrified younger pilots, and once brought a 767 down safely after a bird strike took out both engines. He'd seen a lot. Nothing rattled him anymore. Until the transmission that crackled through his headset 8 hours into Flight 1847. Walsh was coordinating their approach plan with London Air Traffic Control, still hours away, but protocols required early coordination for transatlantic flights. His first officer, Emma Keller, was updating their fuel calculations and checking weather patterns over the Irish coast. The cabin was quiet behind them. Most passengers were sleeping or watching movies. The flight attendants had finished the meal service and were taking a break in the galley. Everything was routine, boring, exactly as Walsh liked it. Then a voice cut through the normal radio chatter on the emergency frequency. United 1847, this is Ghost Leader. Authentication Protocol Alpha 79er Whiskey. You have a high-value asset aboard your aircraft. Do not acknowledge this transmission on open frequency. Switch to secure channel immediately. Walsh's hand froze on the control yoke. Emma's head snapped up from her tablet. She stared at Walsh with wide eyes that said, "What the hell was that?" Walsh had flown long enough to recognize military terminology when he heard it. Ghost Leader wasn't civilian aviation language. That was special operations. Black Ops. The kind of thing that showed up in movies but never, ever in real commercial flights. He glanced at Emma. She was 34, sharp, competent, had been flying as a first officer for 6 years. She'd never heard anything like that transmission either, her expression made that clear. Walsh switched to the encrypted military frequency, something civilian aircraft were equipped to use but rarely did. Ghost Leader, this is United 1847. We're a commercial flight operating under normal civilian protocols. Can you clarify the nature of this communication? The voice that responded was male, probably mid-30s, professional, and carried the kind of cold urgency that made Walsh's stomach tighten with instinctive dread. Captain Walsh, this is Ghost Leader operating under authority of United States Special Operations Command. You have a passenger aboard your aircraft who is wanted by hostile foreign intelligence services. They know she's on your flight. We have credible intelligence indicating a possible hijacking attempt or extraction operation planned for your aircraft. We need immediate confirmation of passenger identity and location. The cockpit went completely silent except for the steady hum of the engines. Walsh felt his heart rate spike. His hands, steady for 3 decades of flying, trembled slightly. Ghost Leader, can you repeat that? Did you say hijacking? Affirmative, Captain. We need you to locate passenger Elena Price, traveling under passport number 77389214, currently assigned to seat 8D. Do not approach her. Do not alert her to this communication. We have special operations personnel already aboard your flight in seats 12A, 17C, and 23F. They will handle extraction and protection protocols once you land at Heathrow. Until then, you need to maintain completely normal operations. Acknowledge. Walsh's mind raced. This was insane. Hijackings didn't happen like this anymore, not since 9/11, not with reinforced cockpit doors and air marshals and all the security protocols. And certainly not targeted hijackings for one specific passenger. Ghost Leader, Walsh said carefully, I need more information. Who is this passenger? Why would foreign intelligence want? The interruption made both pilots freeze. Captain, the passenger in seat 8D is former United States Air Force Captain Maya Reeves, call sign Shadowhawk. She's a classified intelligence asset who was officially declared killed in action 5 years ago. Foreign intelligence services have identified her current identity. They want her alive for interrogation about highly classified operations she conducted against their facilities. We cannot allow that to happen under any circumstances. Your aircraft is now classified as a potential combat zone. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Emma's face had gone completely white. Walsh stared at his instruments, trying to process what he'd just heard. Shadowhawk. Even Walsh, who'd never served in the military, had heard whispers about Shadowhawk. Fighter pilots he'd met in bars over the years told stories about a stealth pilot who could fly anywhere, who penetrated Russian and Chinese airspace like it didn't exist. Air Force buddies mentioned a legend who'd flown missions that officially never happened. The name came up in conversations that always ended with, but that's probably bullshit, and knowing looks that said it absolutely wasn't bullshit. Some called her a myth. Others said she was real but exaggerated. A few claimed they'd met pilots who'd flown with her and said she was the best pilot anyone had ever seen. And she was sitting in seat 8D on Walsh's airplane, pretending to be a university professor. Ghost Leader, Walsh said, his voice carefully controlled, you're telling me we have a legendary military pilot aboard a commercial flight, and foreign intelligence agencies are planning to hijack us to grab her? That is correct, Captain. We have signals intelligence indicating Russian SVR assets tracked her to LAX and confirmed she boarded your flight. We believe they have operatives aboard your aircraft. They will attempt to seize her and force you to divert to a location where they can extract her, probably somewhere in international waters where they have ships positioned. You cannot allow that to happen. Emma keyed her mic privately to Walsh. Captain, this is crazy. How is this even possible? How did they get through security if they're planning a hijacking? Walsh didn't have an answer. He switched back to Ghost Leader. What exactly are you expecting us to do? We're a civilian aircraft with 312 people aboard. We're not trained for. You maintain normal operations, Captain. Our assets aboard will handle any hostile action. Your job is to keep flying toward London and trust that we have this situation under control. However, if hostiles attempt to breach your cockpit or force you to divert, you have authorization to resist using any means necessary. Do you understand? Walsh understood. He just couldn't believe this was actually happening. Copy, Ghost Leader. Maintain normal operations. What about the passenger in 8D? Does she know about this situation? Negative. Captain Reeves believes her cover identity is secure. She has no idea we've detected the threat. That's actually better. If she realizes she's been identified, she might take action that could escalate the situation. Keep her in the dark unless absolutely necessary. Understood. Walsh paused. Ghost Leader, one more question. If something goes wrong, if they do try to take the plane, what are our actual options here? The silence stretched for 3 long seconds. Captain, if hostile forces attempt to seize your aircraft, you have full authority to defend it. Our assets will engage. But you should also know, another pause, the woman in 8D is trained for this exact scenario. She's flown combat missions you cannot imagine. She's evaded hostile fighters, SAM sites, and special operations teams. If your situation becomes critical, Captain Reeves is a resource you can utilize. She knows how to fight. And she knows how to fly under conditions that would terrify most pilots. Emma stared at Walsh. Walsh stared at the radar display showing their position over the Atlantic, hundreds of miles from land in any direction, thousands of feet above an ocean that would kill them all in minutes if anything went catastrophically wrong. Copy, Ghost Leader. We'll maintain normal operations and monitor the situation. Good. We'll remain on this frequency. Update us immediately if you observe any suspicious activity. Ghost Leader out. The transmission ended. The cockpit was silent except for the hum of engines and the soft beeping of instruments. Walsh looked at Emma. Emma looked back at him. Captain, she said quietly, what the hell did we just get into? Walsh didn't have an answer. He just knew that the next few hours were going to be the longest of his career. 45 minutes passed with agonizing slowness. Walsh flew the plane on autopilot, hands resting on the control yoke more for comfort than necessity. Emma monitored their systems and fuel consumption. Both of them kept glancing at the cockpit door, half expecting it to explode inward with armed hijackers. Nothing happened. The flight continued normally. Passengers slept or watched movies. Flight attendants moved through the cabin with drink carts and blanket requests. Maybe Ghost Leader was wrong, Walsh thought. Maybe the intelligence was bad. Maybe this whole thing was a false alarm and they'd land in London and laugh about the crazy transmission they'd received over the Atlantic. Then everything went to hell. A passenger stood up in business class. Row 4, aisle seat. Male, mid-40s, well-dressed in a charcoal gray suit that looked expensive. French passport under the name Michel Rousseau. Walsh had the passenger manifest pulled up on his screen, had been studying it obsessively for the last 40 minutes, memorizing names and seat assignments. Rousseau had been unremarkable during boarding. Polite to flight attendants, kept to himself, read a book during takeoff. Nothing suspicious. Just another business traveler on a transatlantic flight. He walked toward the lavatory at the rear of business class with the casual gait of someone who'd made this walk 100 times on 100 different flights. But he didn't go to the lavatory. He walked past it, scanning seat numbers with the precise attention of someone who knew exactly what he was looking for. In seat 12A, a man wearing a casual button-down shirt and jeans watched Rousseau pass. To any other passenger, he looked like just another traveler, maybe a tech worker, maybe a consultant, nobody special. But his eyes tracked Rousseau with professional focus, and his hand moved subtly to his waistband where a concealed weapon rested against his spine. He keyed a hidden radio transmitter disguised as a pen clipped to his breast pocket, speaking in a voice so quiet that nearby passengers couldn't hear. Target 1 mobile. Moving through cabin toward row 8. Assess threat level elevated. In the cockpit, Walsh received the transmission through his headset and felt ice flood through his veins. Ghost leader, we have movement toward the asset. Repeat, suspicious passenger approaching seat 8D. Copy, United 1847. Marshals are authorized to intervene if threat assessment reaches critical. Maintain normal operations until hostile intent is confirmed. Walsh watched the cockpit door like it might explode. Emma had pulled up the cabin camera feeds on her screen, 4 different angles showing passengers throughout the aircraft. She found the feed showing rows 6 to 10. They watched Rousseau stop at row 8. Look directly at Elena Price in seat 8D. And smile, cold, predatory, triumphant. Dr. Price, Rousseau said in perfect English touched with a subtle French accent. Or perhaps I should say, Captain Reeves. In the cockpit, Walsh stopped breathing. On the screen, Elena's eyes lifted from her tablet. For one frozen second, her face showed absolutely nothing, blank, calm, professionally neutral. Then something changed. Something ancient and lethal flashed behind those reading glasses, muscle memory from a life she'd buried 5 years ago, instincts she tried to forget, reflexes that never really disappeared no matter how hard you tried to kill them. I think you have me confused with someone else, Elena said. Her voice was calm, measured, unremarkable. My name is Elena Price. I'm a professor at Portland State. You've made a mistake. Rousseau leaned closer, dropping his voice to a near whisper that still carried to the passengers in nearby rows. Shadowhawk. We know it's you. We've known for 6 months. We've been watching, waiting, planning. And today, you're coming with us. Elena's hand moved subtly to the armrest, fingers finding the call button. Sir, I really don't know what you're talking about. You're frightening me. Please return to your seat. We know what you did to our facility in Kazan 5 years ago, Rousseau continued, louder now, loud enough that passengers were starting to turn and stare. We know you penetrated our airspace and stole intelligence that destroyed 3 years of our research. We know you killed 7 of our personnel during your escape. And we know the Americans faked your death to protect you from consequences. Elena's face remained calm, but Walsh could see tension in her shoulders, preparation in her posture. She was getting ready for something. Then perhaps this will convince you. Rousseau pulled out his phone, angled the screen toward Elena. Satellite imagery from your last mission. The one that supposedly killed you. Except we found your aircraft debris. We recovered fragments with your DNA. And we found evidence you survived the crash and were extracted by American Special Forces. We've been looking for you ever since. On the phone screen, a grainy satellite image showing a stealth aircraft flying over what looked like Russian territory, date stamped 5 years ago. Mountains, forests, a military facility in the distance. Before Elena could respond, the air marshal from 12A materialized behind Rousseau. His hand was hidden beneath his jacket, but the outline of a weapon was unmistakable to anyone who knew what to look for. Sir, the marshal said in a voice that carried absolute authority, I need you to return to your seat immediately. Now. Rousseau didn't move. Instead, he raised his voice, loud enough for everyone in business class to hear clearly. This woman is a spy. She infiltrated sovereign Russian airspace and committed acts of war against my country. She murdered Russian personnel and stole classified intelligence. She is a war criminal hiding under a false identity, and she will be brought to justice. The cabin erupted. Passengers turned in their seats, staring at Elena. A woman gasped. The teenager in 8E yanked out her earbuds, eyes wide. A man pulled out his phone and started filming. Flight attendants rushed forward from both ends of the cabin, drawn by the shouting. In the cockpit, Walsh made a decision that would either save lives or end his career. He keyed the cabin intercom, his voice steady despite the fear churning in his gut. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We are currently experiencing a security situation. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened and follow all crew instructions immediately. Flight attendants, secure the cabin." Then he switched back to Ghost Leader. "Situation is compromised. The asset has been publicly identified by a hostile. Repeat, cover is blown. What are your orders?" "Maintain current heading and altitude. We're scrambling fighter escort from RAF Lakenheath, F-22 Raptors, ETA 12 minutes. Captain, you need to understand something, there may be multiple hostiles aboard your aircraft. They didn't come just to identify her. They came to take her. They have an extraction plan. You need to be ready for anything." Walsh's hands tightened on the control yoke. "Ghost Leader, I'm a civilian captain flying a Boeing 787 with 312 people aboard. I'm not trained for combat situations. I don't know how to." "Captain," Ghost Leader interrupted, his voice harder now, carrying command authority that Walsh instinctively responded to. "The woman in 8D has training you cannot imagine. She's flown missions that would be classified for another 20 years. If your aircraft comes under direct threat, if hostiles attempt to breach your cockpit or force you to divert, you need to get Captain Reeves up there. She knows what to do. She knows how to fight. And she knows how to fly under conditions that would break most pilots. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" Emma stared at Walsh with an expression mixing terror and disbelief. "Captain, did he just tell you to let a passenger fly the plane?" Walsh didn't answer. Because on the cabin camera feed, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Rousseau moved with explosive, practiced speed. He grabbed Elena's arm with his right hand, strong grip, trained hold, positioned to control her entire body. He yanked her up from her seat with surprising force, pulling her into the aisle. "You're coming with us," he said. "Now. Don't resist and nobody gets hurt." The air marshal drew his weapon in one smooth motion, professional, trained, years of practice evident in how naturally the gun appeared in his hand. "Federal Air Marshal. Release the passenger immediately and put your hands where I can see them." But 3 other passengers stood simultaneously. Seat 9B, a woman in her 30s wearing business casual, laptop bag on her lap. Seat 14F, a man in a hoodie who'd been sleeping for the last 2 hours. Seat 21A, an older man in coach who'd seemed like a harmless retiree. All 3 revealed weapons that had somehow passed through airport security. Not guns, not exactly. Modified items disguised as everyday objects. A pen that was actually a single-shot firearm. A water bottle that concealed a small pistol with polymer components that didn't register on metal detectors. A tablet case that held a knife with a ceramic blade. Items that looked completely harmless when separated, but assembled into functional weapons that could absolutely kill people in an enclosed aircraft cabin. "Drop your weapon," the woman from 9B said in Russian-accented English, her pen gun pointed at a passenger's head, "or we start shooting civilians. Your choice, Marshal. Put it down slowly." The cabin exploded into chaos. Screaming. Parents grabbed children and shoved them to the floor. People dove into aisles, trying to get small, trying to hide. An elderly woman started hyperventilating. A child wailed. Flight attendants froze in the galleys, their training for hijackings utterly inadequate for what was happening. The air marshal from 12A didn't drop his weapon. His training said never surrender your firearm. But he also had 4 hostile operatives with weapons pointed at innocent people. He had to make impossible calculations in split seconds. Elena stopped struggling against Rousseau's grip. When she spoke, her voice was completely different from the quiet professor who'd boarded in Los Angeles. It was military sharp, command-hardened, carrying the authority of someone who'd led combat missions where hesitation meant death. You don't want to do this. Not here. Not with 312 civilians aboard. This isn't a military target. These are innocent people. Rousseau smiled, and it was a terrible smile, cold, professional, devoid of humanity. Then come quietly, Shadowhawk. We transmit landing coordinates to the captain. You surrender to our custody without resistance. The plane lands safely. Everyone lives. Very simple. Or, Elena said, and something in her eyes made even the trained operatives hesitate, you put those weapons down right now, before you start something you absolutely cannot finish. Shadowhawk. Rousseau's smile widened. Look around. You're outnumbered 4 to 1. You're unarmed. You're surrounded by hostages. You have no backup, no weapons, no way out. You've already lost. This was over before it started. Elena's smile was terrifying in its calm, absolute confidence. That's exactly what the last team thought. Right before I killed 3 of them and escaped from a facility your government claimed was completely secure. How many people died trying to stop me, Rousseau? Do you even know? Rousseau's smile faltered slightly. 12, Elena continued, her voice quiet but carrying through the silent cabin. 12 Russian Special Forces operatives died trying to prevent my escape from Kazan. I was injured, outnumbered, and trapped in a facility designed to be inescapable. But I'm standing here and they're not. So before you threaten me with bad odds, maybe consider that I've survived worse. In seat 17C, another air marshal, a woman in her late 20s wearing a University of Michigan sweatshirt, keyed her hidden radio, multiple hostiles armed. Civilians in danger. Requesting permission to engage. The response came from Ghost Leader, transmitted to all the marshals simultaneously, negative. Hold position. Do not engage unless hostiles open fire first. Civilian casualties are unacceptable. Wait for opportunity. In the cockpit, Walsh received the same transmission and felt his blood turn to ice. This was actually happening. Armed hijackers on his plane. A passenger who might be a legendary military pilot. Federal air marshals preparing for a gunfight at 41,000 feet. Ghost Leader, Walsh transmitted, we have a hostage situation in the cabin. Multiple armed hostiles. What are our options here? Captain, maintain heading. F-22 escort is 9 minutes out. But we have another problem, radar shows unidentified aircraft approaching your position from the northeast. Russian origin, likely intelligence extraction team. They're going to attempt to force you to divert. What? Emma shouted loud enough that Walsh winced. They have jets. Affirmative, Ghost Leader responded. This was a coordinated operation. Operatives aboard your aircraft to seize the asset, military aircraft to force you to land somewhere they control. Captain, you need to understand, they want her alive. They'll force you down to international waters where they have ships positioned. You cannot let that happen. Walsh's mind reeled. Ghost Leader, I'm a civilian pilot. I don't know evasive maneuvers. I fly scheduled routes in controlled airspace, not combat zones. The woman in 8D does, Ghost Leader said flatly. Captain, if those Russian aircraft force an intercept, you need to get Captain Reeves to the cockpit. She's flown evasive maneuvers against Russian fighters in aircraft you don't know exist. She knows how to think like they do. She can keep you alive. Get her up there if you need her. Walsh looked at Emma. Emma looked at the radar showing unidentified contacts closing on their position from the east. Walsh made the impossible choice. He reached for the cockpit door override, the emergency system that let pilots open the reinforced door remotely. His hand hovered over the button. "Captain," Emma said, "if you open that door with armed hijackers in the cabin." "I know," Walsh said. "But we might need her." He keyed the intercom, his voice steady through years of training. "Passenger in seat 8D, report to the cockpit immediately. This is the captain. Elena Price, come to the cockpit now." In the cabin, Elena heard the announcement through the chaos and confusion. The operatives holding her froze, confused by this unexpected development, uncertain whether it was a trap or a trick or some kind of protocol they hadn't anticipated. That single moment of hesitation was all Elena needed. She moved. Not like a professor. Not like a civilian who taught undergraduate courses on flight dynamics. Not like someone who'd spent 5 years hiding from her past. She moved like Captain Maya Shadowhawk Reeves, who'd spent 15 years training for hand-to-hand combat, who'd survived situations that would break normal people, who'd killed when necessary and never hesitated when lives were at stake. Her right hand, the one Rousseau wasn't gripping, struck his throat with surgical precision. Not a killing blow, because she was surrounded by civilians and didn't need bodies. A specific strike to the trachea that disabled without permanent damage, that dropped people to their knees gasping for air, that gave her exactly 3 seconds of opportunity. Rousseau's weapon clattered to the floor. Elena caught it before it bounced twice, smooth, practiced, muscle memory from countless hours on firing ranges. She used Rousseau's body as a shield, backing toward the cockpit in a fluid movement that spoke of training most people couldn't imagine. "Everyone get down," she shouted, voice projecting with military authority that made passengers obey without thinking. "Get on the floor and stay there. Put your heads down." The other operatives moved to intercept her. The woman from 9B raised her pen gun. The man from 14F moved into the aisle, blocking her path. The air marshals opened fire. Not wild shots. Not spray and pray. Controlled 3-round bursts aimed at shoulders and legs, professional shots meant to disable not kill, fired with the training that came from hundreds of hours at federal law enforcement ranges. The cabin became a war zone. Screaming passengers, flight attendants diving for cover, the sharp crack of gunfire in an enclosed space that made ears ring and hearts stop. The operative from 9B went down with a shoulder hit. The man from 14F took 2 rounds to the leg and collapsed. Elena reached the cockpit door. Slammed it behind her with her left hand while her right kept the weapon trained on the cabin. Locked it with the manual override, a heavy mechanical bolt that would take explosives to breach. She turned to face the 2 pilots staring at her in shock. Captain Walsh and First Officer Keller saw a woman who just executed hand-to-hand combat like a special forces operator, who held a weapon with the casual, practiced competence of someone who'd carried guns more often than purses, whose entire body language had transformed in seconds from civilian to warrior. Elena's posture was different now, straight-backed, balanced on the balls of her feet, ready to move in any direction. Her voice had changed, no more soft professorial tone, now hard and military sharp. Even her face looked different, like she'd dropped a mask she'd been wearing for years. "Who the hell are you?" Walsh breathed. Elena's voice was ice-cold military command. "Captain, there are Russian military aircraft approaching to force this plane down. You have maybe 7 minutes before they intercept. I need you to give me control of this aircraft right now. You're insane. I'm Captain Maya Reeves, call sign Shadowhawk. I've flown stealth penetration missions into Russian and Chinese airspace that are classified at levels you don't have clearance for. I've evaded SAM sites, radar installations, and fighter intercepts from pilots who train their entire lives to catch people like me. I'm the only person on this plane who can keep you from being forced to land in hostile territory. Now give me the goddamn controls before we all die." Walsh looked at Emma. Emma looked at the radar showing contacts closing fast, closer than they'd been 30 seconds ago, moving with the speed and precision of military aircraft executing an intercept. Walsh made the call. Co-pilot seat. Now. Elena slid into the right-hand seat, secured her harness with one-handed efficiency while keeping the weapon ready, and scanned the instruments with practiced speed, airspeed, altitude, heading, fuel, engine status, flight controls. Taking in everything in seconds. "I have the aircraft," she said. Walsh released the controls, hands shaking slightly despite 3 decades of flying. "You have the aircraft." Elena's hand settled on the control yoke with the natural ease of someone who'd been born to fly. "Ghost Leader, this is Shadowhawk. I have aircraft control. Where are my F-22s? Silence on the military frequency for 3 long seconds. Then, Shadowhawk. Confirm, actual call sign Shadowhawk. Confirmed. Now where's my escort? I have Russian fighters closing on a civilian aircraft with 312 souls aboard. I need air superiority. Now. Holy, the voice changed, younger now, filled with awe that transcended military professionalism. Shadowhawk, this is Viper lead out of Lakenheath. We're 90 seconds from your position. Ma'am, we thought you were dead. Everyone thought you were dead. Rumors of my death, Elena said while checking their defensive options, which were essentially none, because civilian aircraft weren't built for combat, were greatly exaggerated. I need you to interpose between us and the Russian aircraft. Do not engage unless they fire first, but make absolutely clear we're under United States Air Force protection. Rules of engagement are defensive only, but I want them to know that if they force this plane down, they're starting a diplomatic incident that will make the news worldwide. Copy that, Shadowhawk. Viper flight of 4, moving to intercept position. A pause, then, ma'am, it's an honor to fly with you. Elena allowed herself the smallest smile, the first genuine expression that had crossed her face since Rousseau had said her real name. Just keep me alive, Viper. I'm getting too old for this shit. She pushed the control yoke forward, initiating a descent. Captain Walsh, I need you to trust me for the next 8 minutes. What I'm about to do is going to terrify your passengers. It's going to push this aircraft to limits Boeing never intended for civilian operations. But it's going to keep us alive. Understand? Walsh nodded, unable to speak. For the next 8 minutes, Elena Price flew the Boeing 787 Dreamliner like it was a combat aircraft engaged in defensive evasive maneuvers. She banked the massive airliner 30 degrees to port, passengers in the cabin screamed as the horizon tilted violently, as drinks spilled and laptops slid and people who'd unbuckled their seatbelts tumbled into aisles. She dropped altitude in a controlled descent that made stomachs lurch, that pressed people into their seats with force that felt like a carnival ride gone wrong. She increased speed beyond normal cruising parameters, pushing the engines harder than commercial flights ever did, listening to the rising whine of turbofans that were designed for efficiency, not combat performance. What are you doing? Emma shouted over the roar of engines and the screaming from the cabin. Making us hard to intercept, Elena said calmly, her hands steady on the controls. Russian fighters expect us to fly straight and level. Predictable. Easy to calculate intercept courses. But if we're changing altitude, speed, and heading constantly, we force them to recalculate. We buy time. She banked hard to starboard, another 30-degree turn that made the airframe groan, that pushed the 787's design limits without quite breaking them. On the radar, she watched the Russian aircraft adjust their approach, their intercept geometry getting more complicated with every maneuver she executed. Ghost Leader, Shadowhawk. Interrogative, what's their mission profile? Are they trying to shoot us down or force us to land? Intel says force you down, Shadowhawk. They want the asset alive. They'll try to herd you toward coordinates where they have surface vessels. Probably threaten to fire if you don't comply. Copy that. I'm not going to let them get a clean approach. Viper lead, how long until you're in position? 30 seconds, Shadowhawk. We're coming in hot. Elena executed another aggressive maneuver, this time a climb, pulling the nose up and gaining altitude while rolling slightly to make their position harder to predict. Behind her in the cabin, she could hear screaming, could imagine passengers terrified, flight attendants trying to keep people calm while secretly being just as frightened. She felt a moment of guilt. These people had boarded a routine flight expecting nothing more dramatic than airline food and bad movies. Now they were caught in an international incident because of her past, because she'd made the mistake of thinking she could ever really escape who she'd been. But guilt was a luxury she couldn't afford right now. Right now, she had to fly. On radar, 4 new contacts appeared, moving at speeds that made the Russian aircraft look slow. Shadowhawk, Viper lead. We have visual on your aircraft and on the Russian intercept package. 2 Su-35 fighters, aggressive posture, attempting to box you in. We're positioning between you and them right now. Elena watched on radar as the F-22s, the most advanced air superiority fighters America had ever built, slid into formation between the commercial flight and the Russian aircraft. It was a wall of American air power that sent an unmistakable message: come closer and find out what happens. Viper lead, Shadowhawk. Beautiful positioning. Hold that formation and make sure they know you're tracking them with every sensor you have. Copy, Shadowhawk. They're backing off. Looks like they got the message. The Russian aircraft peeled away, maintaining distance now, their intercept aborted. The immediate threat dissipated like smoke in wind. Elena held her aggressive flying pattern for another 2 minutes, making sure the Russians weren't going to try another approach. When she was satisfied they'd really withdrawn, she gradually returned the 787 to normal flight parameters, level altitude, standard cruising speed, straight heading toward London. The cabin fell silent except for soft crying and whispered prayers. Elena engaged the autopilot, took her hands off the controls, and let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for 5 years. She turned to Walsh. Captain, your aircraft. Walsh took the controls with hands that had stopped shaking through sheer force of will. I have the aircraft. He looked at Elena, really looked at her, seeing past the professor disguised to the warrior underneath. Who are you really? Elena pulled off her reading glasses, she'd been wearing them the entire time, had forgotten they were even there. She rubbed her eyes, suddenly exhausted. 5 years of hiding, of running, of pretending to be someone else, all crashing down in one horrible moment. Someone who just wanted to disappear, Captain. Someone who thought she could leave her past behind and live a quiet life. But apparently, the past doesn't let go that easily. It waits. It finds you. And when it does, you have to decide who you really are. Walsh nodded slowly. You saved 312 lives today. Using skills you're not supposed to have anymore. Skills you've been hiding for 5 years. I never stopped having them, Elena said quietly. I just stopped using them. But they don't go away. Training like mine, it's permanent. It's who you are, not what you do. Emma, who'd been silent through the entire ordeal, finally spoke. That was the most insane flying I've ever seen. You flew a commercial airliner like it was a fighter jet. How is that even possible? Elena smiled, tired, sad, but genuine. Because before I was a professor, I flew aircraft that officially don't exist. I flew missions that are classified at levels most military personnel will never see. And once you learn to fly like that, you can fly anything. Even a 787 full of civilians. When United Flight 1847 touched down at London Heathrow 3 hours and 14 minutes later, the aircraft was met by what looked like a small army. Security vehicles surrounded the plane before it finished taxiing. Armed police in tactical gear established a perimeter. Military personnel in unmarked uniforms moved with practiced efficiency. Intelligence officers wearing expensive suits and expressions promising very long interrogations waited near mobile stairs. The passengers were held aboard the aircraft for 97 minutes while security personnel cleared the hostile operatives. 4 men were led off in handcuffs, Rousseau and the 3 others who'd revealed weapons. 1 woman was carried off on a stretcher, wounded from the air marshal's shots but alive. 2 more operatives were identified through passport checks and detained before they could attempt escape. 7 hostiles total. All Russian intelligence, all part of a coordinated operation to seize Captain Maya Reeves and force the aircraft to divert to international waters. The air marshals gave statements to British authorities and American embassy personnel. Flight attendants sat in shocked silence or cried quietly. Walsh and Emma remained in the cockpit, answering questions from military intelligence officers who needed to understand exactly what had happened. Elena was escorted off through a service door, surrounded by a protective detail of 6 heavily armed agents. No press photos. No witness statements. Just a quiet extraction of a woman who'd suddenly become an international incident. While 312 passengers disembarked in stunned confusion, many of them had already uploaded phone footage to social media. Videos of the confrontation in the cabin. The gunfire. The woman in 8D who'd fought like a trained operator. The impossible flying that had felt like a roller coaster designed by someone who wanted everyone to die. By the time the passengers cleared customs, hashtags were trending worldwide, hashtag Flight 1847, hashtag Shadowhawk Lives, hashtag Mid-Air Battle. The quiet professor in 8D who'd saved a plane full of people was suddenly the most famous person in aviation. At a secure facility near Heathrow, a building with no signs, no markings, the kind of place that officially didn't exist, Elena sat across a metal table from a man she hadn't seen in 5 years. General Marcus Bradford. 4 stars, silver hair, tired eyes, and a reputation for running the most classified programs in the United States Air Force. He'd been Maya's commanding officer for 7 years. He'd been at her funeral. He believed she was dead. Now he stared at her like she was a ghost. Shadowhawk. He didn't smile. You were supposed to stay dead. I tried, sir. I really did. Apparently being dead is significantly harder than flying stealth missions into denied airspace. You saved 312 civilians today using skills you're not supposed to have anymore. Skills we spent millions of dollars and years of training to develop. Skills that were supposed to be buried with your old identity. Sir, I never stopped having them. They don't disappear because you change your name and get a new passport. Combat training is permanent. It rewires your brain. Changes how you think, how you react, how you see the world. I couldn't turn it off even if I wanted to. Bradford nodded slowly, studying her face. The Russians know who you are now. So do the Chinese, they'll have heard about this incident within hours. Every foreign intelligence service that wants to interrogate you about the missions you flew knows you're alive. Your cover is completely blown. Elena Price is dead. Everyone knows you're Maya Reeves now. I know. Elena felt exhausted, drained, empty. 5 years of careful hiding destroyed in one afternoon. So what happens now? Do I go back into hiding? New identity, new face, new life. How many times do I have to die, General? We can't put you back in the field, Bradford said carefully. You're too exposed. Too many people know your face now. But we also can't leave you unprotected. You need security, resources, protection from people who want you dead or captured. So I'm a prisoner. Protective custody for the rest of my life? No. Bradford leaned back in his chair. I have a different idea. You train the next generation. You teach pilots how to think the way you did. How to fly the missions that officially don't exist. How to survive when everything goes wrong. Elena stared at him. You want me to teach? At the Air Force Academy. Full faculty position. Your real name, your real rank, no more hiding. You teach advanced flight tactics, evasion techniques, combat decision-making. You prepare the next generation of pilots for the missions they can't imagine yet. And everyone just accepts that I'm alive. After 5 years of being dead. We'll release a statement. Classified mission, deep cover, necessary deception for national security. The media will eat it up. You'll be famous for a few weeks, then something else will dominate the news cycle and people will move on. In 6 months, you'll just be another instructor at the academy. Elena laughed, bitter, exhausted, but with a thread of hope running through it. You make it sound simple. It won't be simple. It'll be hard. Reporters will hound you. Intelligence services will try to approach you. You'll need constant security for at least a year, maybe longer. But you'll be doing something useful. Something that matters. And you won't have to hide anymore. Elena thought about 5 years of pretending to be someone else. The loneliness of never being able to talk about her real past. The constant vigilance, always checking over her shoulder, always wondering when someone would recognize her. No more hiding, she said quietly. No more hiding, Bradford confirmed. Elena looked at her hands, steady, capable, the hands of a pilot who'd flown missions most people couldn't imagine. When do I start? Bradford smiled for the first time. 3 months. We'll get you through debriefings, handle the press situation, set up your security detail. Then you report to Colorado Springs and start teaching cadets how to be the next generation of ghosts. Captain Maya Shadowhawk Reeves stood at the front of a classroom at the United States Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. It was a standard military classroom, rows of desks, projection screen, American flag in the corner. But the 30 cadets staring at her had expressions that ranged from awe to nervousness to barely contained excitement. They all knew who she was. Everyone knew now. The legendary stealth pilot who'd been declared dead 5 years ago. The woman who'd saved a commercial flight by flying combat maneuvers against Russian fighters. The pilot whose missions were still classified but whose reputation had become legendary. Shadowhawk. Alive. Teaching. Maya wore a flight suit now, no more professor disguises, no more hiding. Her hair was shorter again, pulled back in a practical military style. She wore her old squadron patch on her shoulder, her rank insignia, her name taped that said Reeves in bold letters. No more Elena Price. No more pretending. I'm Captain Maya Reeves, she began, her voice carrying through the quiet classroom. Call sign Shadowhawk. For 15 years, I flew classified missions in aircraft you don't have clearance to know about. I penetrated airspace in Russia, China, North Korea, and countries I still can't name publicly. I flew missions that officially never happened, gathered intelligence that changed the course of conflicts you never heard about. She paused, scanning the young faces. 5 years ago, I disappeared. The Air Force declared me killed in action. They held a funeral. They carved my name on a monument. I attended my own memorial service in disguise and watched people mourn someone who was standing right there. For 5 years, I hid. I pretended to be a civilian. I tried to forget everything I'd learned, everything I'd done. A cadet in the front row, a young woman with sharp eyes, raised her hand tentatively. Yes, cadet. Ma'am, why did you come back? You could have stayed hidden. Stayed safe. Maya smiled. Because I learned something important, you can't escape who you really are. You can change your name, your face, your entire life. But your core identity, who you are at the fundamental level, that never changes. You can only choose how you use it. Another cadet, male, near the back, ma'am, is it true you flew a Boeing 787 like it was a fighter jet? That you evaded Russian Su-35s in a commercial airliner? It's true. 312 civilians lived because I remembered my training. Because combat skills don't disappear just because you stop using them. They're permanent. Once you learn to fly the way I flew, you can fly anything. A third cadet, What did it feel like when they called you by your old call sign? When someone said, Shadowhawk, after 5 years? Maya considered the question carefully. Terrifying. Liberating. Like dying and being resurrected at the same time. For 5 years, I'd been someone else, someone quiet, safe, forgettable. And in one moment, hearing that call sign, I remembered who I actually was. Not who I was pretending to be. Who I really was. She walked to the front of her desk, leaned against it with casual authority. You're all here because you want to fly. Some of you will fly fighters, F-35s, F-22s, whatever comes next. Some will fly transports, tankers, bombers. Some of you might end up in programs I can't discuss. But all of you will face moments where you have to decide who you are when everything goes completely wrong. When the plan fails. When the enemy knows you're coming. When you're outnumbered and outgunned and the only thing keeping you alive is your training and your ability to think under pressure. A fourth cadet, how do we prepare for that, ma'am? You train until your skills become instinct. You study until knowledge becomes reflex. You practice until the impossible becomes routine. You push yourself past what you think you can do, and then you push further. Because someday, maybe not next year, maybe not in 5 years, but someday, you might be in a situation where 312 lives depend on what you do next. And in that moment, your training is literally all that matters. She pulled up a presentation on the screen behind her, satellite images, mission profiles, technical diagrams. Today we're going to talk about evasive maneuvers in hostile airspace. How to survive when the enemy knows exactly where you are and you still have to complete the mission. How to think 3 steps ahead when you're flying at Mach 1.5 with SAM sights tracking you. How to stay calm when every natural instinct in your body is screaming at you to panic and run. The cadets leaned forward, eager, hungry for knowledge that might someday save their lives. Maya smiled. This felt right. This felt like purpose. Let's start with a scenario, she said. You're flying deep penetration reconnaissance over denied territory. Your stealth systems fail catastrophically, complete electronics failure, you're lighting up every radar for 100 miles. SAM sites are tracking you. Enemy fighters are scrambling. You're 200 miles from friendly territory. Your aircraft is damaged. What do you do? Hands shot up immediately. Maya called on the young woman from the front row who'd asked the first question. Try to escape the area as quickly as possible, ma'am. Exactly wrong. You complete the mission first. Because if you're flying a classified operation deep in enemy territory, critical intelligence depends on what you're gathering. Lives depend on that intelligence, American lives, Allied lives. You don't run until you've accomplished your objective. The mission comes first, always. Now, who can tell me how to evade SAM sights when your stealth is completely compromised and you're radiating like a Christmas tree? For the next 2 hours, she taught them everything she knew, the tricks, the techniques, the split-second decisions that separated pilots who came home from pilots who didn't. She told them sanitized versions of her own missions, turning classified operations into teaching examples that illustrated principles of survival in combat. She taught them about thinking like the enemy. About predicting SAM launch patterns. About using terrain even at high altitude. About emergency communications when your systems are failing. About staying calm when your aircraft is damaged and hostile fighters are closing and every instrument is screaming warnings. She taught them what it meant to fly like Shadowhawk. When the class ended, cadets clustered around her desk with questions. Ma'am, will we ever fly missions like yours? Some of you might. Most of you won't. Most military flying is routine, procedural, safe. But you need to be ready for the 1% of the time when everything goes wrong. That's what we're preparing for. Ma'am, was it worth it? All the sacrifices. The hiding, the danger, everything you gave up. Maya thought about the question seriously. About 15 years of missions. 5 years of hiding. About never having a normal relationship, never having children, never having the quiet civilian life she sometimes imagined. Then she thought about 312 passengers who'd walked off Flight 1847 alive. Every second, she said quietly. Every single second was worth it. Maya stood on the stage at the Air Force Academy graduation ceremony, wearing her dress blues with ribbons that told a story most people couldn't read. She was presenting an award she'd created, the Shadowhawk Trophy for Excellence in Combat Flight Training, to the top graduating pilot of the class. The young woman who received it had tears streaming down her face. Second Lieutenant Jennifer Morrison, headed for F-35 training, already accepted into a fast-track program for advanced tactical operations. "Thank you, ma'am," Morrison said, her voice breaking slightly. "You're the reason I'm here. The reason I made it through. I read about what you did, what you survived, and I knew if you could do that, I could do this." Maya shook her hand, held it for a moment. "No, Lieutenant. You're the reason I'm here. Teaching you, preparing you, watching you succeed, that reminds me why we do this. Why any of this matters." Later, at the reception, a general approached her. Not Bradford, he'd retired 6 months ago, finally done with decades of running classified programs. This was a younger officer, maybe 50, someone Maya had never met during her operational days. Captain Reeves. General David Chen, Special Operations Command. "I wanted to thank you personally. 4 of your students flew a mission 3 months ago in a location I can't discuss. Enemy fire, system failures, everything that could go wrong did go wrong. They credited their survival to techniques you taught them, specific lessons about staying calm, about completing the mission even when damaged, about thinking 3 steps ahead. They brought back intelligence that changed everything about how we're operating in that theater. Lives were saved because you were in that classroom." Maya felt something settle deep in her chest, peace, maybe. Purpose, definitely. Validation that this was exactly where she was supposed to be. "That's why I teach, sir. That's why I came back instead of staying dead." General Chen nodded. "We're lucky we didn't lose you 5 years ago. Lucky that commercial flight forced you back into the light. The pilots you're training, they're going to be the best we've ever produced. Because they're learning from the best we've ever had." After the general left, Maya found herself standing alone on a balcony overlooking the academy grounds. Mountains rising in the distance. Cadets in groups celebrating graduation. Families taking photos. The normal, beautiful chaos of a class completing their education and heading out into the world. She thought about the last 6 years. The missions. The hiding. The terror on Flight 1847. The decision to stop running and embrace who she'd always been. Her phone buzzed. A text from one of her former students, now flying combat missions somewhere she wasn't allowed to ask about. "Ma'am, used your terrain masking technique today. Worked perfectly. Came home safe. Thank you." Maya smiled and typed back, "That's what it's for. Stay safe. Come home every time." She looked out at the mountains, at the sky where she'd spent so much of her life, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Home. Not a physical place. Not a building or a city or even a country. But a sense of belonging, of purpose, of being exactly where she was meant to be. Maya Reeves, Shadowhawk, wasn't hiding anymore. Wasn't running. Wasn't pretending to be someone else. She was teaching the next generation of pilots how to survive the impossible. How to fly missions that officially didn't exist. How to come home when everything went wrong. And that was enough. More than enough. 3 years after Flight 1847, Captain Maya Reeves received a promotion to Major and was appointed Director of Advanced Tactical Flight Training at the Air Force Academy. She now oversaw the entire program that prepared pilots for the most dangerous missions America flew. Her students went on to fly in conflicts around the world. Some flew stealth missions like she had. Some flew combat support. Some ended up in programs so classified that Maya herself didn't have clearance to know the details. But they all carried her lessons with them. One evening, she received a visitor at her office, a young man in civilian clothes, late 20s, with the bearing of someone who'd seen combat. "Major Reeves? I'm Captain Alex Torres. I flew with you. I mean, I didn't fly with you, but I trained under you 3 years ago. Advanced Evasion Tactics course." Maya remembered him, quiet kid, brilliant tactical mind, had asked the best questions in class. "Captain Torres. Good to see you again. What brings you to Colorado?" Torres looked uncomfortable, like he was struggling with classified information he wanted to share but couldn't. "Ma'am, I can't tell you details. But I flew a mission last month that went sideways in every possible way. Systems failed. Enemy response was faster and heavier than intelligence predicted. I was alone, damaged, and had hostile fighters hunting me." He paused, meeting her eyes. "I survived because of what you taught me. Specifically, the lesson about staying calm when your brain is screaming at you to panic. About completing the mission even when you're certain you're going to die. About thinking like the enemy so you can predict their moves. I used everything you taught us. And I came home." Maya felt her throat tighten with emotion she didn't show. "That's what the training is for, Captain. I'm glad it worked. It wasn't just training, ma'am. It was you. Knowing that Shadowhawk had survived worse than what I was facing, that gave me the confidence to believe I could survive too. You're not just teaching techniques. You're teaching us that the impossible is survivable. That we can do things that seem insane and still come home." After Torres left, Maya sat alone in her office as evening darkened into night. On her walls, photos of classes she'd taught, graduation ceremonies, awards her students had won. Letters from pilots thanking her for lessons that saved their lives. Citations for excellence in instruction. No longer hiding. No longer pretending to be someone else. No longer running from a past that had nearly destroyed her. Just teaching. Just preparing the next generation. Just making sure that when young pilots faced the impossible, they had the tools to survive. Her call sign, Shadowhawk, had almost gotten her killed on Flight 1847. But it had also brought her home to where she belonged. Because call signs never die. They wait in the shadows, invisible and patient, until you need them again. And when they return, they remind you of something essential and true. You are who you've always been. Not who you pretend to be. Not who you wish you were. Who you actually are, at the core, when everything else is stripped away. Maya Shadowhawk Reeves was a pilot. A warrior. A survivor. A teacher. And she was finally, completely, authentically herself. The woman in Seat 8D had saved 312 lives by remembering who she really was. And now she spent every day teaching others to do the same, to embrace their true selves, to own their capabilities, to fly into the impossible and come home alive. Because that's what Shadowhawk did. And Shadowhawk never stopped flying.